Jonathan Hayes was a man who had it all, or at least he thought he did. In his early 40s, he was at the peak of his career, running a successful investment firm that made him one of the wealthiest men in his circle. His mansion was nestled in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods, equipped with every luxury imaginable. From custom marble floors to sprawling gardens and glistening chandeliers, Jonathan's home was the epitome of opulence. People admired him, envied him, and above all saw him as a symbol of success. By his side was his wife, Elena, a strikingly beautiful woman in her 30s. To the outside world, they seemed like the perfect power couple. Elena was always dressed impeccably, her jewelry sparkling almost as much as her smile, and she was often seen at Jonathan's side during high-profile events. They shared a life that seemed straight out of a movie, a life of grand dinners, lavish parties, and exotic vacations. Yet beneath the surface, their marriage lacked the genuine connection that Jonathan had once hoped for. Jonathan, however, was blind to this reality. He loved Elena in the way he understood love to be, a combination of admiration and shared social standing. He believed that as long as he provided her with all the luxuries she desired, their marriage would thrive. What he didn't realize was that Elena's love for him was conditional, rooted more in the comforts of his wealth than in any profound attachment to him as a person. She relished the lifestyle his money afforded, but as for Jonathan himself, he was more of a figurehead, a source of status, than a partner in her eyes. Whenever Jonathan was away for business trips, which happened often, Elena would spend her days indulging in shopping sprees and exclusive spa treatments, filling her time with luxuries rather than longing for her husband's return. Jonathan, too, was consumed by work, believing that his success was what would secure his marriage and their future. He was so caught up in maintaining their lifestyle that he never noticed the growing distance between them. However, there was someone who did notice the struggles and fatigue that Jonathan often masked behind his confident exterior: Maria, the maid who had worked for Jonathan for several years. Unlike the other household staff, Maria was quiet and reserved, keeping to herself as she went about her tasks. But she had an acute sensitivity to Jonathan's moods. She could tell when he was burdened by the stress of his work, even when he wore a polite smile for his guests. Maria had come from humble beginnings. She was a hard-working young woman with a warm heart and a silent strength, and while she remained professional, she couldn't help but feel a quiet admiration for Jonathan. She saw sides of him that no one else seemed to notice: the exhaustion in his eyes after long meetings, the frustration he tried to hide when something went wrong at work. Though Jonathan barely acknowledged her presence, Maria respected him deeply, not for his wealth but for his perseverance and dedication. One day, while dusting the shelves in Jonathan's study, Maria overheard him on a call. His voice was tense, and she caught snippets of his conversation, enough to understand that he was dealing with some serious financial concerns. When Jonathan hung up, he sat quietly for a moment, his usually composed face shadowed with worry. Maria continued her work, pretending not to notice, but she couldn't shake the feeling of concern for him. Unlike Elena, who only saw Jonathan's status and the lifestyle he provided, Maria had come to care about Jonathan's well-being. She noticed things that even Jonathan himself didn't notice, like how he often skipped meals when stressed or how he would spend hours pacing in his study late into the night. She began leaving small gestures of kindness: a fresh pot of coffee during his long work hours, or a warm meal left outside his study when she knew he'd likely forgotten to eat. She never sought his attention or acknowledgement. It was simply her way of caring. Jonathan, absorbed in his work and maintaining his image, rarely noticed these small gestures. Yet, they slowly became a source of comfort to him, a quiet reminder that someone in the vast mansion cared, even if he didn't fully realize it. Maria's quiet presence was a steady undercurrent in his life, a kind of support that was unspoken but deeply felt. The contrast between Elena and Maria was stark. While Elena immersed herself in the pleasures of wealth, Maria embodied humility and sincerity. And while Elena's love was conditional, dependent on the luxurious lifestyle that Jonathan's wealth provided, Maria's concern for him was genuine, selfless, and entirely unspoken. In the grand halls of his opulent home, Jonathan had surrounded himself with people drawn to his wealth and status, yet the one person who truly saw him for who he was went unnoticed. Though Jonathan was unaware, Maria's quiet acts of kindness had started to fill a void in his life that he hadn't even known existed. His heart had grown used to the superficial, to the empty smiles and hollow words of admiration, but in Maria's simple, unspoken gestures there was a warmth he rarely encountered. But as things stood, Jonathan had yet to discover the depth of Maria's loyalty, the depth of a love that had no conditions, no expectations, only a quiet willingness to be there when no one else would. Little did he know, this small foundation of care would become his lifeline in the months to come, as his world, once so secure and invincible, would soon come crashing down. It happened almost overnight. Jonathan's business empire, which had once seemed so secure and unstoppable, faced a crisis that no one had anticipated. A critical investment had backfired, sparking a domino effect of financial ruin. Jonathan, who had always prided himself on his calculated risks and sharp instincts, found himself helpless as the foundation of his wealth crumbled beneath him. His bank accounts were frozen, his assets seized, and his company on the brink of collapse. For the first time in his life, Jonathan was no longer in control. At first, Jonathan tried to keep the truth hidden, even from himself. He worked tirelessly to repair the damage, calling in every favor, leveraging every connection. But the damage was too deep, too pervasive. Within weeks, the news broke to the public, and Jonathan's downfall became a hot topic among the media and his social circles. The people who once revered him as a visionary now whispered of his failure, his arrogance, and his inevitable fall from grace. As the financial crisis intensified, Jonathan finally turned to Elena, hoping for comfort or at least understanding. Yet, when he shared the full extent of his troubles with her, he saw something unexpected in her eyes, a flicker of annoyance, then disdain, and finally, complete detachment. Elena's expression was unreadable, but the air around them had shifted, becoming tense, almost hostile. That evening, Elena packed a suitcase, her movements swift and determined, as if she had planned her exit all along. "I didn't sign up for this, Jonathan," Elena said coldly, her voice devoid of any warmth. "You promised me a life of comfort, of luxury. I didn't marry a man who can't even provide that." Jonathan was stunned, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a physical blow. "Elena, please," he begged, his voice thick with desperation. "This is just a rough patch. I can rebuild everything. Just give me some time." But Elena merely shook her head, her eyes hard and unyielding. "Time is something I don't have, Jonathan," she replied, her voice laced with impatience. "I'm not going to sit around and watch you fail. I have my own life to live." With that, Elena walked out of the mansion, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors that had once echoed with the sounds of their shared laughter and celebrations. Jonathan watched her go, numb with disbelief. The woman he had once loved, the person he had built his life around, was gone, abandoning him at the very moment he needed her most. The next few days were a blur of heartache and disbelief. Jonathan wandered through the now empty mansion, the silence almost suffocating. The rooms, once filled with the lavish comforts of his wealth, felt cold and vacant. Every item, every piece of furniture, seemed to mock him with reminders of what he had lost. He had given everything to build a life with Elena, to surround her with the luxuries she craved, and in the end, it had all been meaningless. Amidst the hollow echo of his crumbling world, there was only one person who remained, Maria. Unlike Elena, Maria stayed, quietly going about her tasks with the same dedication as always. She had witnessed the disaster unfold, the heartbreak that followed, and yet she continued to work tirelessly, offering silent support through small gestures. A warm meal prepared when Jonathan had skipped yet another day of eating, fresh coffee waiting for him each morning. A quiet presence that never asked for anything in return. Jonathan, caught in the throes of his despair, barely noticed Maria's actions at first. But as the days wore on and the pain of Elena's betrayal settled into a dull ache, he began to see her in a new light. Each act of kindness, each thoughtful gesture, felt like a balm to his wounded soul. While everyone else had turned away, Maria was the one person who had remained steadfast, unfazed by the loss of his wealth or status. One evening, as Jonathan sat alone in his study, the reality of his situation pressed down on him like a weight he could no longer bear. He buried his face in his hands, the tears he had held back for so long finally spilling over. It was then that he heard a gentle knock at the door. He looked up to see Maria standing there, a tray in her hands with a simple meal, warm soup and bread. She placed the tray in front of him, her gaze soft and understanding, saying nothing but radiating a silent compassion. For a moment, they simply sat there, the silence between them filled with an unspoken understanding. Finally, Jonathan spoke, his voice raw with emotion. "Why are you still here, Maria?" he asked, his tone heavy with disbelief. "You know I can't pay you anymore. I have nothing left to offer." Maria's eyes softened, and she gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Mr. Hayes," she said gently, "I never stayed here for the money. I stayed because I believe in loyalty, in being there for the people who need it the most. Wealth isn't the only thing that defines a person." Her words struck a chord deep within him, breaking through the bitterness and self-pity that had clouded his heart. He had always seen people in terms of their usefulness, their wealth, or their connections. But here was Maria, a person who had none of those things yet possessed a heart more generous than anyone he had ever known. As the days passed, Jonathan began to rely on Maria's quiet strength. She became his anchor, the one constant in a world that had turned upside down. With her support, he slowly began to find his footing again. In moments of despair, her steady presence reminded him that he was not alone, that there was still someone who saw worth in him beyond his financial standing. One evening, as they shared a simple meal together in the kitchen, a stark contrast to the lavish dinners he was once used to, Jonathan looked across the table at Maria, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. There was something profoundly comforting in her company, something he had never found with Elena or any of the other people who had populated his once glamorous life. It was in those quiet moments, sitting with Maria in the simplicity of his once grand home, that Jonathan began to understand the true meaning of companionship. Unlike Elena's love, which had vanished the moment his fortune was gone, Maria's loyalty was unwavering. She saw him not as a failed millionaire, but as a man worthy of compassion and kindness, regardless of his wealth or status. For the first time in his life, Jonathan felt an unfamiliar emotion, a genuine, unguarded gratitude. Maria had given him something priceless, the understanding that his value was not tied to his bank account, but to the person he was beneath all the titles and wealth. She had shown him the beauty of selflessness, the strength of loyalty, and the power of kindness. In those days, Jonathan found himself healing, not through grand gestures or material wealth, but through the quiet, steady presence of someone who truly cared. As the weeks turned into months, Jonathan found himself spending more and more time in Maria's company. In the midst of his hardship, she became not only his closest companion, but his truest friend. Maria's presence was a quiet comfort. She knew when to speak, and when to simply sit beside him, offering him the kind of support that didn't require words. For Jonathan, who had always relied on wealth and status to define his relationships, this bond was something entirely new. Gradually, Jonathan began to see Maria's unique qualities, her kindness, her patience, and the remarkable strength hidden behind her gentle demeanor. She never asked for anything, never sought his validation or approval. Maria was, in every sense, selfless. Her loyalty seemed boundless, and the more he observed her, the more he realized how genuine she was in everything she did. Unlike the people he had once surrounded himself with, Maria didn't see him as a stepping stone to wealth or influence. She saw him simply as a man in need of compassion. It was during one evening when they sat together in the modest kitchen that Jonathan felt a pang of admiration that went beyond mere gratitude. They were having tea, and as Maria poured him a cup, he watched her with a mix of respect and something deeper, something he wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. She was laughing about something small, something that had happened during her day, and in that moment, he felt an inexplicable warmth spread through him. He'd never felt this way before, certainly not with Elena or with anyone else he'd known. But as his feelings deepened, Jonathan found himself battling with doubt. He struggled to accept the possibility of these emotions, especially for someone he once viewed as a mere maid. The thought alone made him uncomfortable. He was from a world that would never approve of such a connection. In his mind, a barrier remained, an invisible line he hesitated to cross, conditioned by years of living in a society that divided people by wealth and class. As much as he admired Maria, he couldn't bring himself to believe that he, a man of former wealth and prestige, could truly be with someone from such a different world. Maria, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the inner turmoil her presence was causing Jonathan. She continued to care for him with the same quiet dedication, her feelings hidden behind her natural reserve. She had long come to terms with her place in his life. For Maria, caring for Jonathan wasn't about seeking love or acknowledgement. It was about a genuine desire to ease his burdens, to be there for him in the way no one else had been. She knew her role and accepted it, never expecting anything beyond friendship. Then, one evening, something happened that would forever change the way Jonathan viewed Maria. While tidying up Jonathan's study, Maria came across a small, dusty photo frame tucked away in a drawer. She placed it on the desk, her movements instinctive, not expecting Jonathan to notice. But as he walked into the room, his gaze fell upon the photo, and he stopped in his tracks. The picture showed a much younger Jonathan, standing with his parents in front of a modest home, a smile brightening his young face. Jonathan picked up the frame, staring at the photograph with a bittersweet expression. "That was taken right before my father's business fell apart," he said softly, more to himself than to Maria. "We lost everything. I was just a boy, but I still remember the way things changed overnight." As he spoke, Maria felt an old memory stir within her. She studied the photograph closely, her eyes narrowing as she tried to place the familiar scene. And then, as she recognized the image, a revelation hit her, leaving her breathless. "Mr. Hayes," she murmured, her voice filled with astonishment. "That house, I know that place. My family used to live in the same neighborhood. I remember your family struggling, and I remember my mother sending food to your doorstep every week during those hard times. She never told you, but she always said it was her way of helping a family in need." Jonathan turned to look at her, stunned. He felt a rush of disbelief, his mind racing. He had never known about the kindness extended to his family during that time. His parents had always been proud, never speaking about the help they had received. And now, standing before him was the daughter of the very woman who had provided for them when they had nothing. For a moment, there was silence between them as they processed the unexpected connection that bound them. Jonathan felt his heart swell with a mixture of gratitude and awe. Maria's family had been there for him long before he had even known her, quietly supporting him in his most vulnerable moments. It was as if fate had brought them back together, continuing the cycle of kindness her family had started so many years ago. "Maria," Jonathan's voice was thick with emotion. "I had no idea. I never knew how much your family helped us. Thank you doesn't even begin to cover it." Maria shook her head gently, smiling. "Mr. Hayes, you don't owe us anything. My mother helped because she believed it was the right thing to do. She taught me that true kindness asks for nothing in return. I suppose in some way, that's why I stayed. It just felt right." In that moment, Jonathan felt the last of his reservations dissolve. The walls he had built, the judgments he had clung to, all of it vanished. Maria was not just a maid or a companion. She was someone who had been bound to him by an invisible thread of kindness and fate, someone who had been with him in the shadows long before he had ever realized it. He could see now that what he felt for her was more than admiration. It was love, a love rooted in gratitude, respect, and an understanding that transcended the superficial boundaries he had once imposed on himself. Yet, as he came to terms with his feelings, he realized that he had never truly expressed any of this to Maria. She continued her life, unaware of the depth of his gratitude, unaware of the way her presence had transformed him. And so Jonathan made a quiet vow to himself. He would find a way to show Maria just how much she meant to him, to express a love that he now recognized as truer than anything he had felt before. Over the following days, Jonathan's admiration for Maria only grew, blossoming into a tender affection that was difficult to hide. But before he could summon the courage to speak his heart, he noticed a change in Maria. She seemed more distant, less comfortable around him, as if sensing something had shifted in their relationship. Then one evening, without warning, Maria quietly informed Jonathan that she was leaving. "You don't need me here anymore," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "You've come so far, Mr. Hayes. I'm glad I could help, but it's time for me to go." Jonathan was taken aback, his heart sinking at the thought of her departure. The very person who had shown him the meaning of love and loyalty was now slipping away, and he realized that he could not bear to lose her. As she turned to leave, Jonathan took her hand, his voice barely a whisper. "Maria, please don't go. I may have lost everything, but I can't lose you. You are the one person who has truly been there for me, and I love you." Maria looked at him, her eyes wide with shock and an unspoken hope that she had long suppressed. Jonathan's confession hung in the air, a powerful acknowledgement of the bond they shared, a bond built not on wealth or status, but on kindness, resilience, and the quiet strength that only true love could bring. In that moment, everything changed. The realization dawned on Jonathan gradually, settling into his heart like the calm after a storm. Maria was his true love, the one person who had stood by him without asking for anything in return, the woman who had given him strength when he had none left, and the only person who had ever truly seen him for who he was. The depth of his feelings became undeniable, and he knew he couldn't imagine a future without her. But the morning he planned to tell her, to finally confess everything, Maria was gone. Jonathan searched the house, calling her name, hoping that perhaps she had simply stepped out. But the silence in every room confirmed his worst fear. Her belongings were missing, her room tidied with care, as if she had tried to leave without causing any disruption. Maria had left, slipping away quietly, choosing to vanish from his life as suddenly as she had become its center. Despair and confusion overwhelmed Jonathan. He couldn't understand why she would leave, not after all they had been through together. But then he found a small note tucked under a coffee cup in the kitchen, written in her delicate handwriting. "Jonathan, you no longer need me here. I am grateful for every moment we shared, but I believe my place was only to help you through the storm, not to burden your future. I wish you happiness and peace. With love, Maria." The words hit him with an ache he hadn't known was possible. Maria had left because she didn't want to weigh him down, believing that her presence would hinder his new beginning. She had sacrificed her own happiness, thinking he would be better off without her. But she was wrong. Jonathan's life, stripped of its wealth and status, meant nothing without her. He couldn't let her slip away, not now, not when he had finally understood the love he had spent his life searching for. With a determination that came from the depths of his heart, Jonathan set out to find her. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Maria was a humble person, and she would likely have retreated somewhere quiet, away from the city's chaos. But he was undeterred. For days he followed every lead, revisited places he thought she might have gone, even contacted the few acquaintances she had. But no one seemed to know where she was. Jonathan's once proud stature was now a man humbled, driven by nothing more than love. He was no longer the wealthy businessman with connections at every corner. He was a man chasing the person who had shown him the true meaning of love, loyalty, and selflessness. He was met with skepticism, even ridicule, as he shared his story with people in small towns and roadside stops. Many didn't understand why a man like him would be searching so desperately for a simple woman. But for Jonathan, Maria was far from ordinary. She was the woman who had given him purpose when everything else had been lost. Weeks passed, and Jonathan began to lose hope, his heart heavy with the thought that he might never find her. But then, on a rainy afternoon in a small coastal village, his perseverance was rewarded. He caught sight of a familiar figure walking through a crowded marketplace, carrying a bag of fresh produce. It was Maria. Heart-pounding, Jonathan called her name, his voice raw with emotion. Maria froze, turning slowly to see him standing there, drenched from the rain but looking at her with an intensity she had never seen before. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and for a moment she seemed ready to turn and disappear into the crowd. But Jonathan quickly closed the distance between them, his gaze pleading. "Maria, please don't go," he said, his voice trembling. "I've spent every day since you left trying to find you. I can't imagine my life without you." Maria looked away, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Jonathan, I left because I didn't want to be a burden. You deserve happiness, stability. I didn't want to hold you back." Jonathan shook his head, reaching for her hands. "Maria, don't you see? You're not a burden. You're my everything. I thought I knew what love was, but you showed me that it's so much more. It's loyalty, patience, kindness. It's the strength to stay by someone's side, even when they have nothing to offer in return. You are the love of my life, Maria, and I don't want a future that doesn't include you." Maria's eyes filled with emotion, the walls she had built around her heart crumbling under the weight of his words. She had never imagined that Jonathan would feel this way, that he would see her as more than a maid or a friend. But his sincerity, his vulnerability, left no room for doubt. "Jonathan," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with hope, "are you sure? This is a life you're choosing, one that isn't guaranteed wealth or status." Jonathan smiled, his expression tender. "I don't care about any of that, Maria. All I want is you. I want a life built on love, not wealth. I want a partner who sees me for who I am, who loves me despite my flaws. And that person is you." In the midst of the bustling marketplace, as rain poured down around them, Jonathan held Maria close, feeling a peace he had never known. This was the love he had been searching for all his life, a love that had been quietly beside him all along, waiting patiently for him to see it. Their embrace was a promise, a vow spoken without words. Jonathan had finally found his heart's true home, and he knew he would spend the rest of his life cherishing the woman who had taught him the meaning of true love. After Jonathan and Maria's heartfelt reunion in the crowded, rain-soaked marketplace, their lives took on a new beginning. Together, they returned to the quiet, humble life they had grown to cherish, one built not on wealth or status, but on mutual respect, support, and love. As days turned to weeks, their bond deepened, and soon they decided to take the next step in their journey together. Their wedding was nothing like the grand ceremonies Jonathan had once attended with Elena and his wealthy friends. Instead, Jonathan and Maria opted for a simple, intimate ceremony. The wedding took place in a small chapel surrounded by a few close friends, along with the new friends they had made through Maria's community work. The atmosphere was filled with warmth and laughter, the air tinged with sincerity and joy. Jonathan wore a modest suit, Maria a simple but elegant dress that complemented her quiet grace. For the first time, Jonathan experienced a wedding that wasn't about impressing others, but celebrating a love that had grown quietly, steadily, in the background of his life. After the wedding, Jonathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. With Maria's encouragement, he slowly began to rebuild his career, not out of a desire for status, but to create a meaningful life for the two of them. Maria's presence by his side was his greatest strength. She was his confidante, his advisor, and his inspiration. She encouraged him to be thoughtful, patient, and, most importantly, grounded. With her support, Jonathan started from scratch, building up a new company, one based on honesty and integrity. He applied the lessons he had learned from his fall: humility, resilience, and respect for the people he worked with. Within a year, his efforts bore fruit, and his company began to thrive. It wasn't long before he regained financial success, but this time, his approach was entirely different. He was no longer driven by a need to flaunt wealth. Instead, he invested his success back into the community, funding programs that provided job training and support for people in need, something Maria had inspired him to do. Through every challenge and triumph, Maria was there, her quiet strength and unwavering faith in him providing the foundation upon which his new success was built. Jonathan had once believed that happiness lay in luxurious mansions and expensive cars, but now he realized that true wealth was in the simple things: the warmth of Maria's smile, the comfort of a home filled with laughter and love, and the sense of purpose that came from making a difference in others' lives. Jonathan became a changed man, both humbled and wiser. With Maria by his side, he had rediscovered the joy of life's simpler pleasures: morning walks, shared meals, evenings spent in contented silence. He took time to appreciate moments he would have once overlooked, treasuring each one as a reminder of how far he had come. Wealth was no longer his identity or his security. It was simply a tool, one he used to help others and to provide for the woman he loved. Their love story became an inspiration to everyone around them, a tale of redemption and transformation that showed that love, loyalty, and gratitude were the true measures of a fulfilling life. People marveled at the humility and kindness of the once arrogant millionaire who had been transformed by the woman who had once served him as a maid. They saw a man who had learned that the most valuable things in life were those that money could never buy. Years passed, and Jonathan and Maria continued to live in quiet happiness, their hearts filled with gratitude for the second chance they had been given. They remained committed to the values that had brought them together, cherishing each day as a gift. They celebrated anniversaries not with lavish parties, but with intimate gatherings surrounded by those they held dear. In the end, Jonathan found that his life with Maria was the fulfillment of a dream he hadn't known he had, a life of love, purpose, and quiet contentment. He looked back on his journey, grateful not only for the success he had rebuilt, but for the transformation that had brought him to a place of true peace. With Maria by his side, he had discovered that real wealth lay not in the bank, but in the heart, a heart forever grateful and forever filled with love. Together, Jonathan and Maria lived happily, their lives a testament to the power of love, loyalty, and the strength to rebuild not only one's fortune but one's soul.